Alright, what is poppin', people? We're back. And NU is doing a nice little survey. We just had our vote on Bearskita, which resulted in it being banned. And of course, Florgus was involved as well in that council vote. Only getting 2 ban votes, though. So, because Florgus is still pretty heavily contested by the community at large, we did want to have a survey that included it, in addition to a few other Pokemon. So, I'm going to go through this survey, I'm going to fill it out with y'all, and try to talk about my opinions on the general matters. I will throw out a disclaimer. I'm recording this before my other TL has necessarily given the okay to go ahead with this. But I don't care. This is the general idea of what we'll be surveying on anyway, and I wanted to get this video done now so that I don't have to worry about doing a more rushed recording closer to when I'd be uploading. So, first things, of course, we're surveying on how balanced do we find the metagame and how enjoyable do we find it to play. Balanced can mean many things. You can view it as just how diverse the metagame is. You can view it as whether best player will win. You know, how involved is matchup into games. There's a lot of meanings that balanced can take. And I would honestly find balance around a 6. I think the main thing to note from the meta right now is that generally you're seeing balance and bulky offense right now. You know, Sandaconda is the best Stealth Rock setter, and it enables both of those archetypes very, very effectively. You've got just a lot of great Passimian plus Wallbreaker cores, or just general pivot support to get wall breakers in. You've got a plethora of setup sweepers that do offer a good amount of defensive utility as well. Consider like Coil Electros, Calm Mind Florgus, Quiver Dance on Inori Choreo, Swords Dance Toxicroak even, throw him in there. You've got a lot of options, I find, that make building balance really, really trivial to do. And in general, I feel balance is the way you need to go a lot of the time to feel pretty safe against the plethora of wall breakers we've got. Think about your Clawitzers of the world, your Choice Specs Florguses of the world, I've mentioned it as a setup sweeper, but your Swords Dance Toxicroaks of the world, Mabostiv, Meditch, etc. I could go on all day. And I do find that it is still pretty hard to feel like you're good against all of them, and that's where I feel like matchup still plays a pretty heavy element in the meta, where, because of Terra, plus the issues with how many wall breakers we have and accounting for them in the builder, I do feel like the better player doesn't really win frequent enough. And as I say that, I'm actually going to lower this down to like more like a 5. I think there are a couple fundamental issues that lead to that. Threat diversity is always going to be something that you have to contend with, but I would argue the main reason that best player doesn't win right now, as often as they should, does come down to Terra's place in the tier. I think there are solutions we could take to help with that in the meantime, and that is just banning some of the more problematic Pokemon. I think we'll just get to a point anyway where one day Terra's just viewed as the ultimate problem. So for now, I think the meta's kind of middling in terms of how balanced it is. We'll see what measures we can take to remedy that, because there's a lot of pressure put on team building from a lot of angles. So, somewhere at our 5. I do think general team archetype diversity is at a pretty solid point. Yes, balance and bulky offense are predominant, but we've seen a lot of hyper offense still get seen in tours and have pretty good success. If you're really trying to say what archetype isn't being seen much at all, I would say it's more of stall. Like those really heavily defensive cores. Or defensive builds, I should say. And that mostly is just something that's chalked up to Generation 9 as a whole not being hostile. Or not being very favorable to stall, being very hostile. So I don't really care about stall too much when I view that. I just kind of accept, yeah, stall's not going to be that good this gen. And in terms of enjoyability, I mean, I'm honestly still going to throw it at an 8. I do really enjoy playing the tier, because there's a lot of different Pokemon to try out. Does team building get repetitive? Yeah, for sure. But I still feel like there's enough diversity to not just have the same team 20 different times over in your builder. And there's a lot of sets that I haven't gotten to experiment with more. And this is kind of where Terra even comes into the mix as a positive thing, as opposed to a negative aspect of the generation. I find that there's a lot of Pokemon that do get a couple new quirks because of Terra stylization. You know, things like Fara Giraffe being able to run different Terra types to lure in different checks based on what you want to match up better into. You've got Something like Electros being able to compensate for what would otherwise be probably its biggest issue in toxic vulnerability. You could just Terra into a steel type or a poison type, and it no longer matters. So for that, I do like Terra. And yeah, it kind of plays into the enjoyability factor, at least being higher, despite how balanced I view the meta being, much lower. Then we got Zoroark's position in the metagame, because Zoroark has been getting mentioned a little bit in the NP thread, and in council chat as well. We do have a couple people still voicing concerns about Zoroark as a wall breaker. Me personally, I think this mon is not that good. And when I say not that good, let me make this very, very clear. I don't mean not that good as in, oh, it's just mid or trash. I mean not that good relative to a call to ban it. I don't think Zoroark is anywhere near problematic enough to consider it being banned. I think it's a very effective wall breaker, but I think when you analyze its sets beyond specs, it's very middling. Spec Zoroark is easily the best set, and I think it's really the only one you should be running. I've encountered Sword Stance a lot, it doesn't do anything. I've encountered Scarf a bit. There's a little surprise factor there, but at the end of the day, you're a Scarf Zoroark. You're turning them on into a utility option and not really much else. So it's always a little harder to gauge that sort of mon, but I don't find that set distinction between Scarf and Specs is breaking anything. And then Specs, it's just a good wall breaker. It offers no defensive utility to a team. It's fast, but not overbearingly so, as you've still got plenty of Pokemon that are outspeeding it, even naturally. You've got the super large susceptibility to priority. In particular, you're talking about your Aqua Jets from Bruxish, or your Accelerock from Lycanroc. It's not really something I personally have struggled with at all, and I don't really buy the arguments that I've seen people make in favor of dealing with Zoroark. And then how do I view Medicham? So Medicham I actually view a little bit more. It's a little higher on my list. Not by much. And I don't even necessarily think it's a better mon than Zoroark, but in terms of how broken it might be, there's a couple things that separate it from Zoroark in my view. The foremost of which is probably revenge killing it. It depends on set, right? Scarf Medicham is just naturally harder to revenge kill because it's faster, and in Choice Band Medicham is just naturally easier because it's slower. And so you've got more offensive foes that can come in, and because Medicham's bulk isn't anything to, be happy about, you've got plenty of options that can come in and dispatch it. But the issue I find with it is a lot of the common revenge killers, if you're thinking about your Scarfers, don't really take Medicham out too easily. You're looking at your Passimian of the world is the biggest offender of this, where you just can't really revenge kill Medicham without it being significantly weakened, which I find to be kind of cringe. And then Scarf Medicham offers a lot of the same late game potential as Passimian, with Terra Fighting CC being so good, while also flipping the matchup entirely on its head versus a lot of its natural counterplay. And the thing about Scarf Medicham versus Scarf Passimian and late game cleaning is it's so much easier because you're so much stronger thanks to pure power. So, I still think it's broken. Not to the extent to which, again, I wouldn't really consider it for a suspect. And keep in mind, by the way, 1 to 5 does not mean I'm rating these 1 to 5, just means, the scale of them on their own. But I do feel like there's at least a little bit more justification in Medicham than Zoroark, enough to where I would inch it closer to that, middle point of, I could see the suspect test. Anyhow, Bruxish, 4. I think this mon's absurdly broken. And by absurdly broken, maybe I should be voting it to a 5. But as 5 I view as something we'd want a quick ban, and that's not where I view it. I think it's more of that needs to be suspect tested spot. Because Bruxish, there's plenty of mons that do revenge kill it. Even Passimian, despite CC being resisted, your knockoff, I think, always one-shots, barring a Terra. Your U-turn, of course, is constantly pressuring Bruxish as well to revenge kill once it's gotten any sort of chip damage on it, really. But the issue I find with it is, beyond that, there's not a lot that wants to safely revenge kill it. Bruxish has Aqua Jet, so that already kind of dissuades a lot of the offensive Pokemon. Because unless you have, like, I don't know, Sucker Punch Zoroark, which I find kind of mid, Accelerock Lycanroc, and you'd still need a lot of chip damage. something that Terra's, I guess, or just isn't really threatened by Jet, it does make it a little bit harder to reliably revenge kill, because, you might just get jetted. And of course, that's a lot more problematic against Swords Dance Bruxish, which is just significantly stronger. I think the main issue will just come down to there's literally not defensive counterplay to this mon, beyond using Terra. And that partly comes down to NU's defensive water type situation being kind of dire. You've got two options, realistically, not taking into account something like a Sandaconda using its Terra to become a water type. But you've got Vaporeon, and then you've got Qwilfish. One of these Pokemon is O-Code by Psychic Fangs. The other has to be Terra Dark to be able to not get folded into hits. And with Terra Fairy becoming a little bit more of a thing as well, yeah, that's not too good for the Bruxish angle. Naturally, if you thought your team was super weak to Bruxish, you'd make it Terra Dark. But the point stands, it's another one of those mons that just forces you to have to Terra to be able to deal with it. And I don't find that healthy. I find Bruxish's influence on games is just so high. And then you compare it to something like, say, a Basculin or a Clawitzer, which are the other two offensive water types in the format, that you'd maybe compare, Basculin being the most comparable. Basculin only has one stab, has to Terra into like a rock type if you want to make use of Head Smash, and with Basculin, you're forced to consistently take recoil damage the whole game to wall break. Bruxish isn't. You still have Wave Crash, you still have that absolute nuke of a move to drop on, any generically physically defensive mon. But otherwise, just Terra Psychic Fangs makes so much of your progress, and it's very, very low drawback. Eelektross. This is another mon that I'm actually voting up to a 4. I think Eel is just not balanced. I mean, I've mentioned this before, and it comes back to the Bruxish point, really, about being forced to Terra to deal with it. You have to Terra with your offensive Pokemon a lot of the time, just to deny Eel the ability to set up to +6 in front of you. The mon gets a lot of safe switches with how prevalent Sandaconda is, and although Sandaconda started to run Stone Edge a bit more over Glare to compensate for Eelektross having, free real estate in its head, Stone Edge isn't doing a ton. It's still only like a 4-hit KO, if I'm being generous, with the damage rolls. And Eel's just going to coil up versus you and then heal it all back with Drain Punch. So what oftentimes ends up being the play is you go into insert strong wall breaker here, you Terra, and you hope you hope that there's the threat of enough damage to beat Eel. So like, Passimian for example, you go into it, you Terra fighting with your close combat, even at +1, Eel is taking 1,000,000. Zoroark with, Terra Dark Pulse, you threaten that full flinch, or you threaten even just a trick. Make it so that it can't set up further like that. The Expects Florges could at least maybe pressure Eel to use its own Terra, and then maybe you could revenge kill with Passimian later. But it's just this matter of it is a mon that forces you to have to use your Terra so early on just to deny it from setting up. Not to deny it from sweeping you at another point in the game, but at that one moment you say, no, you don't get to do it now. Find a different time. I don't know, it feels weird to call Eelektross broken, and obviously Assault Vest deal is super nice for the format. But my god, do I just despise Coil Eel as a presence. And then we get to Florges. Now, I will be putting a 4 here as well. I didn't want to quick ban Florges because I want to see if people could come up with more counterplay. I thought that was fair. But in my post on the NP thread, I basically boil it down to this as to why I still think it should be suspected and why I think Florges is probably the most questionable presence in the meta. You've got Specs forcing super duper linear sequences, and you've got Cloud9 doing the same. Specs Florges is not an unstoppable wall breaker. Let's get that notion out of the way. A lot of balance builds, and since that's the most common archetype, I'll reference balance here first. They have room around Florges because you've got cores of like Vaporeon Muck, sometimes even throw in an Assault Vest Berserker. You've got Muck plus Umbreon, you've got Vapo plus Berserker. I did mention that 3 at the beginning, but I do want to also just break it down to just cores of 2, because I think that's fair. You've got Pokemon like Zoroark plus, Moonblast resist, so it still pressures Florges to predict properly. You've got Chansey that just walls Florges forever. You've got... God, what are some other mons? You've got still Assault Vest Eel that can take hits from Florges, potentially get a paralysis with Discharge if Florges gets greedy and tries Moonblasting it down. It's not that there's not counterplay, it's just you're so hamstrung by 3 moves on a mon, between Moonblast, Psychic, and Trick, that you gotta... It's like stepping on eggshells. And Clawwitzer's another example of like, okay, you better predict the Water Pulse anytime it goes for it, and whoops, it used Terra Dragon Pulse? Oh, guess you just lose. The difference there is Florges has a much better defensive profile. It's not only faster, which I'm counting that as defensive profile just because you limit offensive counterplay through being faster. Not only that, but you're just so much bulkier overall. No special attackers revenge killing you, even without the investment. You're really just limiting it to physical attackers. Of which, yeah, there are plenty that beat you down. Like a Bruxish, for example, will revenge kill specs Florges always. Passimian could go for Gunk Shot. Toxicroak could Gunk Shot you. It's just that pool of Pokemon isn't enough, in my view. And then you throw the potential Calm Mind in there, too. I mean, Calm Mind, Terra Poison, Florges is a demon. You can't status it anymore, at least not with a Toxic Poison, so that sucks. It can still run Wish Protect and give your team a whole bunch of utility that way. Which means it doesn't even have to dedicate to setting up early in the game. You could just keep it around as a supportive presence, and then, decide, alright, late game, it's time. Sort of like if you throw Calm Mind on Vaporeon as a last move. And then because Calm Mind is going to pump up the physical bulk, yeah, it's still not the bulkiest physically, but it becomes much less of a liability compared to spec sets. So I think there's enough justification from that view to say, yeah, suspect it. And if I were to order these 3, because I do have them all at 4s, meaning I view them roughly the same, I'd probably say Florges 1, mostly because community opinion seems to match that Florges should get viewed for a suspect. And then I'd say Eelektross 2, Bruxish 3. But I could also see Bruxish 2, Eel 3. I wouldn't mind that either. Is there anything else I think needs to be considered? Personally, no. And any other thoughts, none. And I will not click submit during the video because it might show my email. So yeah. But I hope y'all enjoyed this coverage. Let me know down below what your opinion on, the survey is. What Pokemon you think maybe need to be banned that wasn't mentioned here. What are your opinions on the Pokemon in the survey? And I hope you all are having a great day, and I'll catch y'all next time. Peace.